I got loyalty, got royalty inside my DNA. I got love, peace, got war and peace inside my DNA. I got poison, pain, and joy inside my DNA.
Hello and welcome back to my channel, The Fanfic Fantasy. Join us as we explore the world of fanfiction and fantasy and bring you the best story and discussions. This is the second part of What If Tanjiro Became a Demon Instead of Nezuko. So give this video a like and subscribe for more videos in future, so let's get into the fanfic. The days continued on with Nezuko somehow training even harder, so hard that Tanjiro was often worried she was pushing herself too much. She was up even before the sun rose, doing push-ups, swinging the sword, burying her face in a basin of water to hold her breathing. And in the evenings she would go back home all messed up and looking severely frustrated, having exhausted herself with trying to slice the boulder over and over. Even then, the two of them would still fight until midnight, sparring with their wooden swords and pushing each other to the limit of their abilities, improving in small increments over time with every bad habit they discovered and corrected over the months. As Nezuko improved, Tanjiro did as well. He had started to take advantage of that thing he dubbed the opening thread, trying to make the most of it every time he detected it. Sometimes he defeated Nezuko with it, sometimes he did not. After all, Nezuko was growing into a wonderful swordswoman in her own right. Tanjiro couldn't help but be proud of her, and from the smell that sometimes lingered on Urikodaki, he was proud of her, too. Tanjiro knew the day he was dreading was going to come soon. The day when Nezuko would be able to slice the boulder, the day she would finally get approved to go through the life-threatening final selection. When that happens, Tanjiro would not be there to protect her. When that happens, their life of peaceful training at Mount Sajiri would end too, replaced by a life of continuous demon slaying. And Tanjiro was not looking forward to it. Still, it was something that had to happen, if they were to push through their goals of killing that monster and finding a cure for Tanjiro. This extended training montage was merely an interlude to the play that was their lives, and one day they would have to continue on to the next act. Months passed, and Tanjiro waited. The seasons came and went. Nezuko became stronger and stronger, and when the day arrived, Nezuko came back home with the widest grin he had ever seen on her face, happiness leaking off her as she engulfed Tanjiro in a big hug. "I did it, Onii-chan. I did it." Despite being overcome with worry, Tanjiro could not be any prouder. He looked at Urikodaki, who was staring at the two of them from the doorway. There was a scent of worry on him as well underneath the pride. Tanjiro's chest felt so warm at the thought that their mentor cared about them so much. He gave Urikodaki a grateful smile. That night, they celebrated with a hot pot, as per usual in this house whenever there was a special occasion. Nezuko thanked Urikodaki solemnly for all the help he had given them thus far, and dug into the food with renewed fervor. Tanjiro contented himself with smiling at them as they both ate their fill, having already taken his vial of blood a few days before. As it turned out, he could subsist on a minimum of a vial of blood every week. Anything less would have his body wanting to shut down completely. They have not tested it, but Urikodaki speculated that if Tanjiro ever got injured, he would need to drink more. That's one reason to not abuse his regenerative capabilities, Tanjiro supposed. Even though he had the capacity to heal from even the direst of injuries, he should still take care not to get hurt too badly, lest he lose control of himself. The night was filled with warmth and laughter. After dinner, Nezuko ended up having to snip off her hair, as she complained that it was already getting longer. Even then, Tanjiro caught her staring at the locks she had cut off with something akin to longing, and it left a bad taste in Tanjiro's mouth. He knew Nezuko liked her hair longer. He hoped she'd let it grow again soon. But he suspected there was something more to it that Nezuko wasn't telling him, some meaning to the length of her hair that she kept in the privacy of her own mind. Tanjiro decided not to pry. The next morning came too fast, too soon. Suddenly, Nezuko was already getting ready to head off to Mount Fujikasen for the final selection. The demon boy watched as his sister donned a cloud-patterned jinbei-style kimono, similar to the one Urikodaki always wore, as well as a fox-style warding mask that their mentor had given her the night before. Urikodaki said that the mask was charged with a spell to protect her from harm, and Tanjiro dearly hoped that it would work from the bottom of his heart. All he wanted was his sister to get back to them safely. Nezuko had a determined look on her face, the same fire burning in her eyes, a Nichiren blade strapped to her waist. She looked every way like a fierce fighter that Tanjiro could not help but compare to how she looked merely 2 years before, fragile, delicate, soft. There was nothing soft about today's Kamado Nezuko, not anymore, except perhaps the way she smiled. She still retained that patient, loving smile that Tanjiro loved so much. It was on her face right now as she patted his head gently, reassuring him. "I'm going to be all right, Onii-chan." I'll pass and become a demon slayer. I'll do my best. Tanjiro nodded slowly as he reached over to straighten her kimono. With the 2 years that had passed, Nezuko had grown taller. They were almost the same height now, especially with Tanjiro's body not aging after his demonification. It made him sad to think that she might outgrow him soon. Mount Fujikase is a long way from here, so I don't know when I'll get back. I would like to watch Oni-chan's Hinokami Kagura this year too, but in case I can't, pray for my success to Hinokami-sama for me. Could you, Oni-chan? Tanjiro nodded vigorously. He would pray to the gods however long they wanted him to. And don't get too caught up in your dancing too, Oni-chan. Pay attention to the sun. We don't want last year to happen again, do we? Tanjiro smiled at her sheepishly. Last year on New Year's Eve, he had danced the Hinokami Kagura as soon as the sun set, as per tradition. At the time, he had already pretty much ingrained all the forms into his body from sparring with Nezuko, as well as mastered the breathing technique he needed to keep going. He had managed to dance for hours, getting so lost in his own head that he did not even notice the sun rising. And Nezuko had to cover him up with a thick blanket and pull him back into the house before he got burned. It was so embarrassing, but he couldn't help it. Sometimes the Hinokami Kagura just puts him in a sort of trance-like state, where nothing else mattered but the imaginary beat in his head and the movements he needed to perform through them. Nezuko wouldn't understand. She had never shown interest in learning the Hinokami Kagura before. She didn't know how it felt to perform it. Tanjiro couldn't explain the feeling, either. So in the end, he had let Nezuko berate him for his recklessness, nodding apologetically every few seconds. Tanjiro lifted up his hand to Nezuko now, showing off his pinky. The gesture was heavy with implication, a culmination of all the promises that the siblings want to keep for each other until the day Nezuko comes back. Promise you'll take care of yourself. Promise you'll be safe. Promise you'll be okay. This would be the first time they would be apart since the day their family was murdered, since the day Tanjiro had been turned into a demon. Tanjiro knew Nezuko must be filled with nerves. He was, too. Nezuko smiled as she lifted her pinky as well and curled it around Tanjiro's. They moved their hands, their thumbs touching, sealing the promise. Nezuko then let go and smiled at Urakodaki, who was in the corner watching them. Urakodaki walked closer to place a hand on Nezuko's shoulder, a small encouraging gesture. Don't worry about your brother. I'll take good care of him. Urakodaki reassured Nezuko. Thank you very much, Nezuko, with a small bow. She walked out of the house and into the sunshine, before looking back and raising her hand in farewell. I'm off, Urakodaki-san. Oni-chan. MMM, was all Tanjiro could say, but he needed no words with Nezuko. Nezuko understood. All the things Tanjiro could not say, all the things he could not express. Even with mere noises like these, Nezuko understood. I love you, too, Oni-chan. She called out, her voice filled with mirth and laughter. And with that, she ran off, hand on her katana. Her kimono swaying with the wind as her form became smaller and smaller in the growing distance. Tanjiro was left with a pang in his heart, worry eating at his insides. He felt Urakodaki place his hand on his shoulder too, and he looked up, his expression slightly helpless. Don't look like that, Urakodaki softly scolded. Your sister is going to be just fine. Tanjiro nodded, gazing back into the road his sister had taken. And then, silently, he closed the door. Nezuko is strong, he told himself, his pinky finger tingling with the weight of their shared promise. Nezuko will be all right. Days passed. Urakodaki was a man of few words, and with Tanjiro's muteness, the days inside the house quickly became silent and monotone. With nothing much to do, Tanjiro had taken to fashioning his sister's favorite kimono into a haori, for when she comes back with her Demon Slayer uniform. It has also become his encouragement to himself that she will come back, that she will need this haori someday. Sewing was not his strongest suit, but he worked hard to make the stitches as even as possible, so that it would look as good as Nezuko would have done. He hoped it would be a nice surprise. At night, Tanjiro continued doing his nightly drills, swinging his sword, controlling his breathing, practicing his forms. It was all he could do not to succumb to the overwhelming worry that hits him whenever he thinks about where Nezuko could possibly be at that moment. Was she still on the way to Mount Fujikase, or had the final selection already started? Had she already killed her first demon, or did the demon got to her first? He hoped she wasn't tired, or injured, or starving. What if she was already dead? All these thoughts flit around in Tanjiro's mind, and he couldn't help but wish she was back sooner. It didn't even matter to Tanjiro if she passed the test or not, if she became a demon slayer or not. All he wanted was for her to be alive. That was the wish he fervently prayed for every night, and when the New Year's Eve came around once again, it was the wish he prayed for to the Hinokami. That New Year's Eve, Tanjiro danced with a heavy heart. He danced like he had never danced before, putting his all into the movements, into his prayers. Please keep Nezuko safe, he thought as he moved around fluidly, slashing the sword he was holding to and fro. Urokodaki was somewhere else, inside the house maybe. Tanjiro did not care much. He was completely in his own world. He twisted and turned and jumped and leaped, showing off the forms he had practiced with Nezuko so many times in the past 2 years. The Hinokami Kagura, as he was starting to realize, had become something more than a tradition to him. It had become not only a connection to his family but also a connection to Nezuko in particular, as the memories of them training together poured into his mind. He continued on dancing, restarting the cycle over and over like a sun rising and setting. Like the seasons coming and going, he continued without pausing, seemingly forever. Tanjiro, he heard Urokodaki call him from somewhere, but he ignored it. He kept his eyes closed under the face covering, focusing solely on his movements as he danced, over and over, as he prayed. Please keep Nezuko safe. Please keep Nezuko safe. Please keep Nezuko safe, he thought insistently. If nothing else, Hinokami-sama, even if you weren't able to prevent the deaths of Mom, Takeo, Hanako, Shidru, Rokuta. If nothing else, I just ask this one thing. Please, please. Tanjiro, keep Nezuko safe. She is the only family I've got. Even if I have to keep dancing forever, please. Tanjiro, don't take anyone else from me. Oni-chan. Tanjiro opened his eyes at the sound of her voice, immediately turning his head towards it, his movement coming to a halt. Right there, beside Urokodaki, Nezuko stood looking worse for wear, her kimono dirty and slashed in places, the warding mask on the side of her head chipped and filled with scratches, holding a walking stick that she seemed to be supporting herself on. At first, Tanjiro's mind stuttered. He had been thinking so hard about Nezuko that he couldn't quite comprehend that she was standing right in front of him. She did say that she was hoping to see his Hinokami Kagura tonight, that she would try to hurry. The sword fell to the ground from Tanjiro's limp hands. He wanted to hurry over to envelop Nezuko into a tight hug, to express his utter happiness in seeing her again. But something in her expression stopped him. She was staring at him in disbelief, in awe, and beside her Urokodaki stood motionless, staring at Tanjiro as well, as if there was something even more important and noteworthy than the fact that Nezuko came back to them finally. He stared back to them and tilted his head, questioningly. Oh, Oni-chan, you're... Nezuko looked up. Tanjiro followed her gaze. It was only then that he realized that the sky above him was no longer the dark indigo he was used to, but the brilliant blue of a slowly brightening sky. The kind of sky he had not been under in years, the kind of sky that had forsaken his kind. Nezuko looked shocked. Urokodaki seemed to be, as well. Tanjiro didn't know what to think as he reached his hand up to the sky in wonder, watching the sunlight dance across his fingertips. And Tanjiro stood, motionless, under the rays of the rising sun. I hope this letter finds you well, Oyakata-sama. I will not bother with pleasantries so as not to waste your precious time. 2 years ago, Tomioka Jiu had sent to me a pair of siblings he had met while out on a mission. It was a girl who wanted to become a demon slayer, Kamado Nezuko, and her older brother, Kamado Tanjiro. As is the unfortunate usual in a demon slayer's line of work, the siblings had just gone through a personal tragedy. Their entire family has been slaughtered by what we assume is Kibutsuji Musen himself, and Tanjiro, subsequently, has been turned into a demon. Despite losing his humanity, however, Tanjiro had not lost his human emotions. Even in a starved state, he refuses to devour humans, subsisting merely on a small amount of human blood. Even now, 2 years later, this has held true. Tanjiro is a remarkable kid with a remarkable sense of self-control. But I digress. A month after I took them in, I found out that the Kamado siblings somehow had demon slayer heritage in their blood, a fact that neither of them was aware of in the beginning. On the eve of the New Year's, Tanjiro performs a family tradition that they called the Hinokami Kagura, and it turned out to be a breathing form that Tanjiro later identified as sun breathing. I believe this heritage may be the reason that their family was attacked to begin with, and I had decided to look into it. But now, 2 years later, I remain unable to find anything about a sun-breathing form. Thus, I have decided to reach out to you, in hopes that you may be able to shed some light on the subject. I believe their demon slayer heritage and this mysterious sun-breathing form is connected to the multitude of eccentricities I have seen on Tanjiro. He is a unique demon, unlike anything I have ever seen before. Not only had he conquered his hunger for human flesh, he had also recently conquered the sun, and right now was able to walk under it without any issue. Although the situation seems far-fetched, I assure you that it is an indisputable fact. While I worry about what a sun-resistant demon may mean to the future of the Demon Slayer Corps and the demons at large, I have to admit that Nezuko and Tanjirou had become somewhat dear to my heart. Still, I am not letting my fondness cloud my judgment when I say that I am confident that Tanjirou would not bring any harm to humans, nor would he aid the demons. He is a trustworthy person, and in the event that he proves to be otherwise, Kamado Nezuko, as well as Urokodaki Sakonji, and Tomioka Jiyuu will atone by committing seppuku. Now that Kamado Nezuko has passed the final selection, Tanjirou wishes to accompany her in her missions. I sincerely hope that you will allow it. These siblings have no one else but each other, and they are both powerful swordsmen in their own right, as I have trained Nezuko in water breathing, and Tanjirou had developed the Hinokami Kegura. I believe they will manage to save and protect many people and become a force to be reckoned with. This is just my gut feeling, but I think Nezuko and Tanjirou would be a vital component in our never-ending fight against Kibutsuji Musen. Perhaps they will make a difference in our quest to end the demons once and for all. Thank you for taking the time to read this letter. I wish you all the best in your endeavors. Yours truly, Urokodaki Sakonji. The sound of footsteps roused Tanjirou from his silent daydreaming. Standing outside near the front of Urokodaki's hut where he was diligently laying the washed bedsheets on the clothesline so they would dry under the sun, Tanjirou stared at the three figures that were closing in on him from a distance. There was a man and a woman, and a young child that Tanjirou would guess must be their daughter, given the resemblance she had to the two adults. She had the man's black hair, and the woman's piercing eyes. They moved slow but graceful, laden with a certain sense of dignity, as if they were royalty and not just mere travelers walking along a dirt path. The woman was carrying something in a box strapped to her back, as well as an umbrella to keep the harsh sun from beating down on the three of them. The man seemed frail, his hands supported by his daughter. Some kind of cursed scar was covering half of his face, but he retained a gentle aura about him, a certain tranquility. The wind shifted, and Tanjirou caught a whiff of their scents. It made his nose wrinkle. The smell of wisteria clung to them like second skin. But there was something to it too, the smell of sickness, of underlying tragedy. It clung especially well to the frail man, and Tanjirou wondered if it had something to do with that sickly scar. Tanjirou tilted his head curiously at them, unsure what to think. He let them walk closer until the man was right in front of him, smiling serenely. Up close, Tanjirou could see that one of his eyes were blank and unfocused. He was half blind. That one remaining working eye seemed to take Tanjirou all in, studying his features, pausing for a moment at something on his forehead, before meeting his gaze again. "Ah, you must be Tanjirou," the man stated nonchalantly. Tanjirou's eyes widened in surprise. His voice was soft and calm, and it made the demon's head feel light and fluffy. He didn't know who this person was. He wondered how he knew his name. "Tanjirou, are you done with the bedsheets?" he heard Urokodaki ask behind him, but then their mentor made a strangled sound. Tanjirou turned his head to look just in time to see Urokodaki freeze in his tracks, the firewood he was holding falling down to the ground. As soon as the man turned his head to smile at the old man, Urokodaki fell to his knees on the ground in deference. Tanjirou's eyes widened once again. He had never seen Urokodaki show this level of respect to someone before. "Oyakata-sama, I am blessed to be in your presence," Urokodaki said stiffly. "What brings you here, so far from the headquarters?" "Rise, my child," the man replied, even though he looked evidently younger than the old Urokodaki. "I am merely here for a visit, as well as a delivery. I was curious about the contents of your letter. I found it prudent to meet the very first sun-resistant demon myself." "To meet me?" Tanjirou frowned. Someone of power, someone evidently up in the ranks of the Demon Slayer Corps, was showing interest in him. He knew he was different. He knew he was an anomaly, not only because he refused to eat humans, but because he can now walk under the sun as well. What did this person want from him? He should probably get worried, but the man's scent showed no malice, no ill intent. His smile was sincere. Tanjirou found himself relaxing in his presence. "Pardon the intrusion, but this conversation would better be done inside the house, with all three of you, over a cup of tea," the man said. "Would you call in Kamado Nezuko for me?" The six of them sat around the elreee, a small flame lit on the hearth to heat up water for their tea. The man and his family sat on one side, all straightened backs and quiet grace, and Tanjirou found himself shifting nervously as he subconsciously leaned toward Nezuko, who met the newcomer's gazes fearlessly, sure of herself. Urokodaki was silent as he poured the tea into cups, offering them to everyone one by one. Even Tanjirou got one, though all he could do was stare at the liquid silently. At least the warmth of the cup was settling his nerves a little bit. The man accepted his cup with a graceful nod before staring back at the Kamado siblings. When he spoke, his voice held the same calm and soothing tone. Let us get the pleasantries out of the way. My name is Yubayashiki Kaguya. I am the current head of the Yubayashiki household, as well as the 97th leader of the Demon Slayer Corps. This is my wife, Amin, and my son, Kiriya. It is a pleasure to meet you. Son, Tanjiro flushed a little bit, embarrassed that the whole time he had thought the child was his daughter. He couldn't be blamed for the mistake though, as Kiriya was wearing what most would consider feminine attire, a purple flower print kimono, and a hairpin resembling wisteria flowers. He also looked quite feminine in his own right, his features smooth and delicate, evidently not having gone through puberty yet. Tanjiro wondered how old he is. He still looked very young. Nezuko seemed surprised with the revelation as well, but she did well to hide it. She nodded at her superior, tone respectful but guarded. My name is Kamado Nezuko. This is my older brother, Kamado Tanjiro. Pleased to meet you too, Oyakata-sama. Kaguya smiled. Kamado Nezuko, Sakonji told me that you have just passed the final selection. You must have worked hard. Congratulations. At that, Nezuko looked a little taken off guard, startled by the compliment. Tea, thank you. Silence. Nothing was heard aside from Kaguya quietly sipping his tea. Even though he wasn't looking at Tanjiro, the demon felt as if his attention was still directed at him. Tanjiro fiddled his thumbs around his cup a little bit, nervous to be under such scrutiny. It didn't seem like bad scrutiny though. It didn't feel like either him or Nezuko was in danger. It was just a gentle curiosity that Kaguya exuded from his scent. There was also an undertone of interest, of intrigue. Tanjiro supposed it can't be helped. I found out your story through Sakonji's letter, Kaguya continued. I am sorry for your loss. Shall we get to the point, Oyakata-sama? Nezuko interrupted, her voice hard. I've heard you came all the way here because of my brother. Kaguya did not look fazed. He looked thoughtful. Of course, if you wish so. Kamado Tanjiro's cases. Well, it would not be an exaggeration to say we have not seen a case like this in 1,000 years. Ever since the rise of the demons from the first demon progenitor, Kibutsuji Musen, there has been no demon who had developed a resistance to the sun. If there was, they would have been devoured by Musen already, as it is one of his main goals, to achieve absolute perfection, to be unkillable. Nezuko tensed. Suffice to say, that Kibutsuji would no doubt go after your brother if he finds out. The fact that he hasn't yet must mean that Tanjiro had already somehow burned away Musen's control over him. That's something good, at least. But I believe he would come after both of you, either way. If your family truly has a connection to the sun-breathing form, Musen will try his best to kill you anyway. Kaguya stared down at the cup in his hands, contemplative. I wish I am bringing better news. Forgive me. Tanjiro and Nezuko glanced at each other, and Tanjiro's hand itched to close around his little sister's. It wasn't like this was news. Since the day they found out that they had a demon slayer heritage, Urakodaki had proposed this as a possibility. Personally, Tanjiro did not mind Musen going after him. It would make it easier to find the monster that massacred their family. He worried about Nezuko though, and what being around him would mean for her safety. He wondered if he would even stand a chance against the most powerful demon there is. If he was good enough, strong enough. He remembered his promise that day the monster ruined their lives. I'll hunt you down and end you even from beyond the grave. It was a promise he still kept close to his heart. He couldn't bear the idea of Kibutsuji Musen still being out there, Tanjiro's family unavenged, killing people and destroying families. He couldn't stand it. Nezuko's goal may be to find a cure for him, but Tanjiro's goal was to end this nightmare from the source. Demons weren't inherently evil, he knew, but Kibutsuji Musen, that man was malice itself. It doesn't matter if he would be after us or not, Nezuko answered for the two of them. The only thing I care about is finding a cure for my brother. If Kibutsuji Musen becomes a hindrance to that goal, I will cut him down with my blade. Not before I cut him with mine, Tanjiro thought vindictively. As I'm sure you would, Kaguya replied with a pleasant smile, as if they were talking about the weather. I am aware that you siblings have a personal vendetta, but I assure you the Demon Slayer Corps is just as determined to get rid of Kibutsuji Musen as you are. There are people who have trained for years, willing to put their lives on the line, so that the threat he poses may be stopped once and for all. For starters, there are the pillars, talented swordsmen they all are, and I am sure they are just as determined to face him. Unfortunately, there have been very few chances to do so. He is a master at hiding himself. We have not seen hide nor hair of him in literal centuries. Tanjiro's existence, as well your own Nezuko, may be the missing key we all need to rouse him out of hiding. And for that, I came here with a selfish request. A request? Nezuko pressed. Kaguya nodded. If it was up to me, I would suggest we hide Tanjiro away from the world for the time being. If Kibutsuji Musen managed to devour him and acquire his sun resistance, it would be a detriment to the entire humankind. It would be better for him, safer for him. Tanjiro rose to his feet indignantly, spilling his tea all over the wooden floor. He was not going to stay hidden away in secret while Kibutsuji Musen goes after Nezuko anyway. He shook his head to side vehemently, letting out loud growls to express his displeasure. He's going to stay with Nezuko. He will protect her and stay by her side. That's what he promised to his mother's memory. He promised he would take care of Nezuko, no matter what it took. Kaguya seemed to anticipate his reaction, but I assumed this idea would be met with resistance. Tanjiro glared at him, and he let out a quiet chuckle, one that seemed to tinkle in the tense silence of the room. Please sit back down, Tanjiro. I have no intention of forcing you or Nezuko into anything. I may be Nezuko's superior, but your lives remain your own. Tanjiro let out some more low growls, unconvinced. My brother and I already talked about what we think we should do from now on, Nezuko interjected. And it was true. Well, talked was a generous term as Tanjiro was merely able to let out grunts and growls, but they discussed it all the same. Especially after the development of Tanjiro's sun resistance. We thought that it would be better not to tell anyone we encounter the truth about what he is. That he should pretend to be a human, and it shouldn't be that hard. Nobody would think a demon could walk in the sun anyway, and Onii-chan already looked human enough in his natural state. Nobody should be able to tell, right? The uncertainty creeped on her tone at the last sentence, glancing back at Tanjiro. Kaguya hummed. Perhaps, though the stronger a demon gets, the more easily they could tell other demons apart by their presence alone. Kibutsuji Musen is no exception. There is also the fact that he may very well recognize your brother, as he was the one who turned him that day. Kibutsuji Musen has an uncanny ability to see through other demons' heads as well, sometimes even remotely. And while Tanjiro here has no doubt already severed his connection to Kibutsuji already, he may get information from other demons you encounter, other demons you slay on the way. Not to mention the word of mouth that may spread if the humans and other demon slayers around you find out. A sun-resistant demon is a very big deal. There's no way people won't talk about it. Nezuko looked worried, and Tanjiro wondered if she was considering giving him up to be kept under protection after all. He would fight tooth and nail, fang and claw, to make sure that doesn't happen. Nezuko didn't get to tell him what to do. He was still Nezuko's older brother, after all, even though Nezuko was now physically older than him. There is, however, one way we could conceivably hide Tanjiro's nature from everyone without locking him up somewhere, and it relates to the request I mentioned earlier. Kaguya paused as if bracing himself. According to our records, Tanjiro is not the only demon who is not in league with Kibutsuji Musen. There is another. She goes by the name Tameo, and to this day, she remains hidden even from Kibutsuji himself, an incredible feat. I believe with her methods, she may be able to help us hide Tanjiro's secret long enough, until the time is right. If we are lucky, she may even be able to assist the Corps in figuring out a proper plan of attack. As much as it pains me to admit, the Demon Slayer Corps is not ready for an all-out war with Kibutsuji Musen. Not at this time. But when we finally are, as I hope we will be in my lifetime, I would like to ask if you and especially Tanjiro would be willing to draw him out, to act as bait, as Tanjiro will no doubt be an effective one. Tanjiro, could you do that? Tanjiro did not even have to think about it. He immediately nodded, clenching his fists in determination. Anything to bring down that monster. Anything to free this world of his evil. This Tameo person. Do you think she will really help us? Where can we find her? Nezuko asked. We are fortunate enough to have information of where she is at this time. My sources say she's somewhere in Asakusa, although exactly where in that city we are not very certain. If she did not want to be found, she would not be found. There is the fact that she is very wary of demon slayers as well, and would not approach us on her own, despite our shared goals. I was hoping that meeting someone who toes the line between demons and demon slayers, someone like the two of you whose unique circumstances give you the chance to bridge both sides, would encourage her to hear us out. Kaguya smiled, before his tone turned commanding. That is why, for your first mission, I'd like you to go to Asakusa and find Tameo-san, and tell her of the Demon Slayer Corps' intentions to join forces. Could you do that for me, Kamado Nezuko? Nezuko's back straightened up. Why yes, Oyakata-sama. Kaguya's smile turned fond. You are a good child. He turned his head slightly towards his companions, his wife in particular. Amin-san, the packages. Yes, Amin said as she took the box that was tied to her back earlier, and placed it on top of her lap, unwrapping the cloth around it carefully. The fight in him gone, Tanjiro found himself settling back on the floor as he watched in curiosity. The box was small in width but very long, and Tanjiro soon understood why. Inside there were 2 katanas encased in their sheaths, and Tanjiro did not need anyone to tell him they were Nichiren. This must be what Kaguya meant earlier when he said he was here for a delivery. Nezuko's blade has finally arrived. Kamado Nezuko's Nichiren sword, Amin said tonelessly as she held the katana in front of her like it was something sacred, handing the blade to Kaguya, who then handed it to Nezuko. Nezuko looked a little overwhelmed, surely not expecting that the leader of the corps himself would be the one handing her her very own blade. But she looked happy nonetheless. She held the handle, admiring it. Scarlet crimson sand and scarlet crimson ore, obtained from the mountain closest to the sun. The process produces steel that can absorb sunlight. This blade is made by Haginzuka Hadaru, I believe, one of our very best. I hope it will be useful in your journey. Kaguya said. Thank you very much, Nezuko murmured. Go on, draw it. Urokodaki spoke for the first time since this talk started. Tanjiro had nearly forgotten he was there. Nichiren swords are also called color-changing swords. They change color depending on the bearer. Nezuko hesitated, but eventually she drew the blade, holding it in both hands. Tanjiro watched in fascination as the color indeed slowly changed, starting from the hilt end to the tip, though not in the way either of the siblings expected. Instead of a single, solid color, there were 2, a blue hue reminiscent of Urokodaki and Jiu's blades. But in the middle there was a black band that if Tanjiro stared intently, looked like it resembled the shape of vines and leaves. Nezuko blinked at the color, looking slightly troubled. It's not a solid color, she whispered. Urokodaki hummed, though Tanjiro noted there was a certain scent of pride. Blue for water breathing, I suppose, though don't think too hard about the black bits. The reason for why the Nichiren blades change color and what the color means remain mostly a mystery at this point, so it really shouldn't matter. Not having a solid color is not completely uncommon, Kaguya reassured her. Some of our current pillars do not have a solid color on their blades either. Perhaps it is a sign that you will rise just as far as they have. Nezuko flushed a little bit as she sheathed her sword. She seemed a little pleased at the idea of rising in the ranks as Kaguya suggested, and Tanjiro felt happy for her. He let out a few soft hums of encouragement, at least until Amin took out the second katana from the box, held it like the way he held Nezuko's, and intoned, Kamado Tanjirou's Nichiren sword. Tanjirou's eyes widened as Kaguya took the sword from his wife's hands and offered it to him. Nezuko and Urokodaki also seemed genuinely astonished. Kaguya had a certain quality to his smile that suggested he was enjoying their surprise, their shell-shocked faces. Tanjiro hesitated, meeting the man's eyes. Why? He wanted to say, why are you giving me this? As I read from Sakonji's letter, you are a swordsman too, are you not? Kamado Tanjiro, Kaguya asked. That's true, he was. Kind of. He had trained alongside Nezuko for 2 years. While she honed her mastery of water breathing, he trained himself in Hinokami Kagura's 12 forms. But that didn't make him a demon slayer. He had not passed any kind of final selection, was physically unable to, considering what Nezuko told him about it, a prison of wisteria flowers in a solitary mountain, keeping all the demons locked inside. He didn't know if he was worthy to have his own Nichiren blade, didn't know if he deserved it. All this time he had not even entertained the idea of getting one, so certain he was that he wouldn't. And yet now Yubayashiki Kaguya, the leader of the Demon Slayer Corps himself, was offering him a blade. Tanjiro did not know how to react. He felt someone tap his back, and when he turned his head to look it was Urokodaki, urging him forward to take the sword. Tanjiro hesitated, but he followed their mentor's guidance. The sword felt heavy and dangerous on Tanjiro's hands. Uncertain, he looked back at Kaguya, and then at Urokodaki and Nezuko as well, gauging their reactions. Kaguya looked serene as usual, Nezuko looked encouraging, and Urokodaki smelled proud. He let out a noise of confusion from the back of his throat, still unsure about all of this. Why? He desperately wanted to ask Kaguya. At some point, it seemed the looks he was giving the man finally got through, and he finally decided to explain himself. Your Hinokami Kagura is the sun-breathing form, is it not? Kaguya asked. Tanjiro nodded. After thinking about that night over and over, recalling the things that Monster had said, he was certain that that was the true name of their family's tradition. Without a doubt, Kaguya nodded back. The sun-breathing form is the very first form that was created, from which all the other breathing forms were derived from. It would be truly a shame for the sole remaining sun breath user of this generation to never own his own Nichiren blade, so I decided to correct that. Call it a whim of mine, if you are so inclined. Please go ahead and draw it. The information about sun breathing left Tanjiro reeling. He didn't realize it would be such a big deal. the breathing form from which all breathing forms were derived from, passed down as the Hinokami Kagura of their humble coal burner family. It seemed unreal. Not for the first time, Tanjiro truly wondered how that came to be. How was it that the Kamado family became intertwined with demons and demon slayers? Heeding Kageya's words, Tanjiro finally drew the sword. For a long moment, he stared at his own reflection in the steel blade, at least until it started to change color. Slowly, the blade turned black, pitch black, from hilt to tip, as if it was absorbing the light from all around it. Tanjiro frowned. Black, huh? You don't see this pitch black too often, Urakodaki commented. A fine color, Kageya replied. I'm sure this blade will serve you well. Tanjiro sheathed his blade and bowed to Kageya, trying to express his gratitude through gestures alone. Kageya merely smiled his serene smile once again, and Tanjiro had to wonder what was going on in his head. His reasons for giving Tanjiro his own blade, why he's even helping them in the first place. Even though Tanjiro was a demon, his grip on his blade tightened. He supposed he's a special, valuable demon, one that could help the core bring down Kibutsuji Musen. Still, even if Kageya's help was possibly riddled with personal agendas, Tanjiro was grateful. That was when he heard something swoop in from the window. A Kasugai crow, he realized. It promptly settled on Kageya's shoulder, pecking at his finger affectionately. Tanjiro had encountered some Kasugai crows in his time in Mount Sajiri, as Urakodaki sometimes uses them to send and receive messages. When it opened its mouth and talked, the demon wasn't even surprised. Asakusa, Tokyo, find Tameo-san. There you are, Kageya said fondly, before facing Nezuko and Tanjiro once again. This would be your Kasugai crow, Nezuko. He will guide you on your way to Asakusa. Take care of him. He is a very intelligent bird. Yes, Nezuko replied, lifting her arm to offer it to the bird. The Kasugai crow flew on cue and landed on her arm, letting another squawk before repeating its lines, Asakusa, Tokyo. Find Tameo-san. I must get going, unfortunately. You two will do your best on your first mission, I hope. Kageya asked. Yes, Nezuko replied enthusiastically. Tanjiro nodded fervently. That's good, Kageya smiled. I wish you two the very best. Have you changed? Urakodaki asked. Yes, Urakodaki-san, Nezuko answered from inside the back bedroom. She opened the door, a determined set on her shoulders. Tanjiro's eyes widened as he saw her standing there in her Demon Slayer uniform, an all-black military-style collared shirt with a knee-length pleated skirt in place of hakama pants. On her feet, she was wearing her pink Zori sandals with tab-eye socks and leg warmers, and on top of her uniform she wore the Haori Tanjiro had painstakingly made for her, out of the old pink kimono she so dearly loved. Her shoulder-length hair was kept out of her face with a singular pink ribbon, the same one she had always worn, and strapped to her side was her Nichiren blade, ready to be used. When she saw Tanjiro's eyes watching her, she smiled shyly and murmured, "Do I look weird?" Tanjiro immediately shook his head vehemently, lifting both his thumbs to tell her how much he approved. How could his beloved little sister, the beauty of their hometown, ever look weird in anything? It suited her, as everything suited her, and Tanjiro would not budge on this very correct fact. How about you, Tanjiro? Are you ready? Urakodaki asked. Tanjiro nodded. He was wearing his usual attire, a black and green checkered Haori over a white robe and black pants. His old, turquoise scarf was wrapped around his neck, Hanafuda earrings hanging on his earlobes, bamboo muzzle on his mouth, his hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. On his side, he had his Nichiren blade, and in his pockets he had some small necessities like money, and the syringe kit that they got from the Butterfly Mansion. The sun was high up in the sky that day, but that was no longer going to hold Tanjiro back, and he reveled in that fact with pleasure. If he hadn't developed sun resistance, he would probably still have to be carried around by Nezuko on her back, a literal burden on her shoulders, and he was glad that they were both past that. As they stood in front of Urakodaki, both set and ready to go, the old man reached over to tidy up their clothes, starting with Nezuko's collar and then with Tanjiro's scarf, before patting both their shoulders and letting out a pleased sound. Tanjiro let out a pleased sound of his own. Nezuko gave their mentor a bright smile. Take care in all your travels, Urakodaki said, and Tanjiro could smell him getting slightly emotional under that mask. And remember, you could always come back and visit whenever you want. Thank you, Urakodaki-san, Nezuko said, for everything. Tanjiro did not know how else to express his gratitude, so he launched himself on the old man and gave him a tight hug. He really did owe Urakodaki a lot, from helping him get over his problem with sleep, to teaching him how to master the Hinokami Kagura. Urakodaki had done nothing but help him from the very beginning. Thank you, he wanted to say. Thank you so much. Being back on the road after so long felt surreal. Before the tragedy that befell their lives, Tanjirou and Nezuko had never really had the chance to travel around so far, content to stay within the confines of their mountain, and the village at the foot of it. Now, Tanjiro supposed being on the road would be a substantial part of their lives, at least until they accomplished their goals, and especially now that Nezuko was a demon slayer. But he wasn't complaining. As long as he and Nezuko were together, he was content. As long as their family won't be broken apart any further, he was okay with all these changes, okay with not having a proper home. One day, when all of this is over, they will come back to their mountain, come back to the house that's been the Kamado's for centuries. For now, they will fight together until the day their lives could be peaceful once again. Onii-chan, I didn't want to start an argument in front of Yurikodaki-san, but Nezuko started, a small pout forming on her lips. Tanjiro paused in his walking, turning his head to face her, and she halted too, placing her hands on her hips. Is that muzzle still really necessary? Tanjiro inhaled sharply, hands lifting up to touch the precious bamboo muzzle on top of his mouth. He nodded fervently in order to tell her that yes, it really is necessary, and then shook his head to say that no, he was not going to take it off, no matter what Nezuko's opinions about it are. Throughout the 2 years they have been training, Nezuko had always expressed discontent on the fact that Tanjiro rarely ever took off the muzzle Jiu had given him, and he supposed Nezuko's opinion on it had not changed from the very moment Jiu fastened the muzzle on Tanjiro's mouth. She just never really liked it. But Tanjiro did. He liked the comfort it brought, and he has always seen the item as a tool to help him cling onto his humanity. Nezuko did not understand how hard it still was for Tanjiro, especially whenever it was time to drink blood. How sometimes it felt as if he was one step away from losing himself, from falling into his demonic instincts, from becoming a monster. The muzzle was not a punishment for him, Jiu had said, it was a promise, and it was one Tanjiro took seriously. Nezuko sighed. Alright, I'm not gonna say anything more about it. It's just that, I know I've gotten better at understanding you over the years, but that's just because I have the luxury of time to figure out your hums and noises. In a situation where you'd need to tell me something quickly, wouldn't the muzzle be a hindrance? At least if you have it off you could talk, even just a little. And besides, you're supposed to be pretending to be human, doesn't the muzzle kind of give you away? Tanjiro shook his head decisively. While she did have a point that a human with a muzzle was going to look weird, that's all it is, he would get strange looks, nothing more. It was better than his fangs being out in full view, or God forbid, his entire demonic form. Slitted eyes, bulging veins and all, being out in the open when he attacks someone because he did not have a physical reminder to restrain himself. Not that he thought he would do that as soon as his muzzle was off, but Tanjiro did not trust his demonic side at all, so he was not going to risk it. Her point about him not being able to relay information quickly had some merit though, as it could easily be a detriment in a life or death situation. But he didn't think speaking will do him any good either, especially not on the pretending to be human front. Whenever he spoke, his voice was always low and gravelly, like he was growling out words instead of speaking them. There was an inhuman quality to it that Tanjiro personally hated, a quality that would no doubt give his demonic nature away. If only there was a way to talk without actually talking, to relay information quickly without using his voice. And as soon as he mulled it over he realized he had been stupid. He should have thought about this earlier. Hadn't he already been doing this for the past 2 years? Suddenly, he crouched on the ground, using his sharp fingernail to write in the dirt beside his feet. Curious, Nezuko crouched beside him, so like the way she used to back when they were younger that it made him feel warm inside. Tanjiro first wrote the word voice, and then scratched that out aggressively, meeting Nezuko's eyes firmly and cementing his opinion on the matter. And then, underneath that scribbled out word he wrote, hand signals equals words. Thankfully, Nezuko was quick to understand. Her eyes lit up. You want to make a language out of hand gestures. That's actually a good idea. Why haven't we thought of that before? Tanjiro nodded enthusiastically at her. A language that was theirs, language that only they would understand. It would be fun, like a game, and it would be useful as well. It was a shame that they had to make it in the first place, a shame that Tanjiro was still stuck with a speech impediment, even years after the attack. But privately, in the back of his mind, he figured his loss of speech must have been the price he paid for refusing to consume human flesh. Maybe even the price he paid for being able to walk in the sun as well. And it was a price he was very much willing to pay. It was a pain, and they had to be creative to work around it, but it was not unbearable. Let's start making it while on the way to the city, why don't we, Onii-chan? Maybe we can start with names. Oh, your name could be this, she said as she lifted her index finger straight up. A single finger, like a number one, since you're the eldest son, Onii-chan. Tanjiro mulled it over and figured he was fine with it. As they started walking on the road again, he reached out to touch Nezuko's hand and reposition her middle finger, straightening it so that it was outstretched beside the index finger, 2 fingers as close and tight to each other as he and Nezuko currently are. Together, he smiled at his own sentimentality as he gestured to the hand position and then pointed at Nezuko. Nezuko stared at it and smiled, her eyes shining with understanding. Yeah, that works for my name. Let's go with that. What do you think Urokodaki-sen's name should be? Tanjiro thought about it for a moment before a silly thought crossed his mind. He lifted his hand to his face as if he was stroking a really long nose, and the two of them couldn't help but burst out laughing. There was nothing more Urokodaki than his red Tengu mask, and even as they both figured they should really not make fun of their beloved mentor, neither of them could let go of Tanjiro's idea. Well, it was not like Urokodaki would know. It would just be their little secret. They spent the rest of their trip figuring out hand signals for common people and common words, with Nezuko's Kasugai crow cawing every now and then ahead of them to give them directions towards Asakusa. At one point, 2 of them had to go over the signals all over again from the beginning, if only so they would not forget which hand gestures were already given meaning, and which else were still ripe for claiming. Tanjiro took memorizing the signals with the same earnestness as he had memorizing the movements of his sword, and it seemed to him that Nezuko was giving the same effort. Anything to bridge the gap of communication that has been between the two of them since the day Tanjiro was turned into a demon. By the time they had arrived at the great city, night had already fallen, but with the way the streets were riddled with bright lights, you would think it was still daytime. Nezuko gasped and gaped at the sights in front of them, and Tanjiro could not blame her. He was already feeling slightly dizzy, with the way the city was running and brimming with life. There were so many people, so many shops. The buildings were so high it hurt Tanjiro's neck to look at them, and there was some kind of vehicular monstrosity that ran on steel tracks on the ground. Tanjiro let out a disgruntled huff, his nose picking up the many scent of humans all around him. He had not been around this many humans since he's been turned, and it was a little overwhelming. Thankfully, Nezuko seemed to notice his predicament, and she squeezed his hand. Onii-chan, are you all right? Why don't we walk somewhere in the outskirts for a while? Tanjiro nodded at her gratefully, and the two of them walked out of the packed streets into the darker, less crowded areas. They found themselves resting in front of an udon stand, Nezuko ordering a bowl while Tanjiro sniffed around curiously, trying to catch a whiff of demons so that they may be able to find Tameo and leave the city soon. Unfortunately, it didn't seem like it would be that easy. The smell of all the humans around kept distracting him, making his mouth water. He swallowed his saliva and let out a displeased sound as he sat beside Nezuko, who had already started digging into her bowl of udon. Any luck, Onii-chan? Do you smell her? She asked. Tanjiro shook his head dejectedly. He stretched his index and middle finger and made a gesture with his hands that resembled a person walking. Then we will walk around. Hopefully we can find her, Nezuko agreed, before slurping up some noodles. Don't worry if we can't find her tonight. Urokodaki-sen gave us enough money to stay at an inn for a few days. Hopefully it's not too expensive. Tanjiro nodded. As he waited for Nezuko to finish her dinner, he continued sniffing around, trying to make sense of the mouth-watering scents all around him. The smell of human was still prevalent. But the more he concentrated, the more he noticed that it was not all there was. There were hints of the sour, putrid smell he had come to associate with demons around the city here and there. He supposed they could follow each one and see if it leads them to Tameo. Concerningly, there were more than one direction the demonic scents were coming from, and more than one kind of scent, suggesting that there were more than one demon in the area. Did Tameo have more allies? He sure hoped that was the case. He didn't like the idea that dangerous, actual man-eating demons were prowling all over this busy city, attacking clueless civilians. He took a deep breath, trying to figure out which direction would be the best to go first. But then he caught a whiff of that scent, and his body suddenly froze. No, he thought. No way. Onii-chan, Nezuko asked, having finished her bowl of udon. Tanjiro turned his body to the direction of the scent, and he could practically feel his red eyes slitting as his hand reached to grab at his Nichiren sword, fist tight around the hilt. His mind was racing, his body pumping with adrenaline at the thought of cutting that monster's head with his blade. Never forgive. Onii-chan, what's the matter? Nezuko's voice cut through the haze in his head. The haze that was burning with rage and screaming for vengeance. Nezuko's face was in front of him, looking worried and slightly alarmed, as she lifted both hands to cup his cheeks. Calm down, Onii-chan. What did you smell? The monster, Tanjiro wanted to say. Instead, he let go of his sword, a shaking hand closing into a tight fist, pulling it close to his heart. It was a simple gesture that brought the two of them to silence earlier that day when they decided on it. Nezuko's eyes widened in disbelief, and when she spoke, Tanjiro could hear the anger in her voice. "Kibutsuji Musen, here," she whispered. And then, with a sudden purpose, she took the scarf around Tanjiro's shoulders and pulled it over his head, essentially making a hood to hide his face. She took his hand and started pulling him in the opposite direction he was facing earlier. Tanjiro let out a few low growls to express his discontent, his desire to seek out the Musen's scent, not walk away from it. It was only when Nezuko gave him a look of contained rage and quiet calculation, that he remembered Kaguya's words. Not yet. His fangs dug into the bamboo muzzle, grinding against the material. He was terribly frustrated. If he's in the city right now, there's even less chance we can find Tamayo-san on our own, as she would no doubt be hiding from him, Nezuko reasoned. Let's find an inn for tonight and start searching in the morning, when Kibutsuji Musen can't move. Okay, Oni-chan. Tanjiro nodded reluctantly. Nezuko squeezed his hand. The scent of the monster lingered in his mouth, and Tanjiro was not able to stop thinking about it for the rest of the night. Listen closely, Nezuko said as she straightened Tanjiro's clothes, the two of them gearing up for the day ahead. Her voice was firm and stern. We're going to go out there and try to track Tamayo-san. You are going to try and sniff her out, but should you get any hint that Kibutsuji Musen is nearby, we are going to immediately move away from it, not towards it. She pulled the scarf over his head once again just like she did last night, hiding most of his face from view. You are going to keep this on your head at all times while we're outside. We can't have him finding out about you so early, like Oyakata-sama said. Promise me, Oni-chan. Tanjiro let out a small grumble. Nezuko put her hands on her hips. Promise me, she demanded. Tanjiro sighed as he lifted his pinky. Promise. At that, her expression softened, and Tanjiro could see the relief in her expression. Tanjiro figured she must have been worried that he'd lose his mind if he smelled that monster's scent again. But now that he had promised to keep his head, she was reassured. Tanjiro was many things, but a breaker of promises was not one of them. He had never broken a single promise, not to Nezuko, not to their family. That's good, she smiled. Let's go, Oni-chan. Asakusa was as much a feast for the eyes in daytime as it was at night. There were still lots and lots of people, lots and lots of tall buildings, lots and lots of shops. As soon as they left the inn they had rented for the night, Tanjiro was once again hit in the face with a barrage of scents and noises, all loud and annoying, all borderline overwhelming. Perhaps if he was still human, he wouldn't be as affected. As it happened, he was a demon now, and along with the enhanced speed and strength were the enhanced senses that Tanjiro was wishing he didn't have right now. He wondered why it smelled like there were a lot of demons in the area, when the hustle and bustle of the city felt unbearable to Tanjiro. Was he just that much of a country bumpkin? Were city demons just used to it? Personally, Tanjiro felt like he would always prefer the quiet and serene beauty of the countryside. With the expression on Nezuko's face, he supposed she felt similarly. They walked around the city, relying on Tanjiro's sharp nose to point them the way. He probably looked strange sniffing around the sidewalks and sometimes on the ground. But city people didn't seem to pay them much attention, so busy they were with dealing with their own affairs. Once Tanjiro was able to discern the scent of the demons from the humans, he figured out that there were at least 5 demons in the area that he could smell, excluding Kibutsuji Musen himself, and hopefully including Tamayo. Nezuko frowned at the number, as it was pretty high to be so concentrated in a single place. Were they taking advantage of the city's vastness and the constant coming and going of people in order to nab innocent people easily without much notice? Or was there something more sinister going on? Either way, Nezuko was a demon slayer, and Tanjiro was as good as one. Neither of them were about to let defenseless people become demon dinner, not on their watch. They decided it was best to track each one and take care of them, and if they happened to find Tamayo on the way, that was a good bonus for their trouble. Which led them to now. They were moving, rushing, running through the dark cramped alleyways behind and around the city buildings as they chased their target through the dim shadows, relentless. The demon they were chasing was letting out a scared, helpless scent, and Tanjiro could not help but feel a little sorry for him, even though he had already done acts that could not be forgiven. They had caught the demon in one of the seedier parts of the city, in the middle of a meal unfortunately, and as soon as he saw them he took off. The sun was still out and just about to set, so the demon had no choice but to run deeper into the alley they found him in, into the shadows. Tanjiro and Nezuko were quick to give chase, deeper and deeper into the back streets of Asakusa. But Tanjiro could see that a dead end was coming up ahead, and he knew this long chase would end soon. He took a deep breath as he tightened his grip on his sword, the black blade seemingly merging with the shadows. He braced his feet against the ground and jumped, flipping in the air until he was upside down face to face with the demon, delivering a single clean, decisive blow. Inakami Kagura, ninth form, he thought, setting sun transformation. By the time Nezuko arrived, the demon was already on the ground, slowly turning to ash. He didn't speak, merely let out wails and growls that made Tanjiro feel a little uneasy. It didn't seem like the demon had a sense of self yet, which meant that it hadn't killed that many people yet. At least that's what Tanjiro remembered Yorokodaki said. He inhaled to take in the demon's scent one last time, confirming his suspicions. He faced Nezuko and moved his hands. He was really glad they decided on gestures now in hindsight, to sign out a few words. Weak, new. The fact that Nezuko did not look out of breath after that chase was a testament to how hard she had pushed herself back in training. She nodded with understanding. That's the third one, too. That Musen. He created the demons in this city, didn't he? That's why he was here. That's why there's so many of them here. That's why they're so weak. Tanjiro nodded grimly. He supposed that it made sense that the progenitor of the demons would have to go out of his way to mass-produce demons like this, given the fact that there were a lot of demon slayers who hunt their kind. If Kibutsuji Musen didn't do this often, then there wouldn't be so many demons left. As long as Kibutsuji Musen lived, as long as he remained at large, there will be people like Tanjiro who will have their humanity stolen from them, and would not be strong enough to resist. It made Tanjiro feel guilty for not chasing after his scent last night, for not attacking him when he was right there, prowling in the same city, so close at hand. Nezuko reached over and squeezed his shoulder. Tanjiro let out a sigh. He was not so arrogant that he'd think he could defeat the most powerful demon on his own. Not with his current strength. He would like to, and if push comes to shove he would strive to, but seeking him out without a plan of action would be suicide. He didn't want to put Nezuko in danger, either. They had to find Tameo soon. Hopefully, she would be able to help them. So, where's the next demon scent coming from? Oni-chan, Nezuko asked, glancing up at the small strip of sky visible between the building roofs above them. It's getting pretty late. Do you still smell Musen around the area? If he is, we might have to retire for the night. Tanjiro shook his head. While the monster's scent was really strong last night, today it had sputtered into mere hints in the streets here and there. He supposed those hints were the remaining traces of where Kibutsuji Musen went to last night. And concerningly, he tended to spend time in the more crowded, populated areas. He remembered what the demon looked like that night, dressed in his western suit and matching hat, looking very much like a proper, well-off gentleman, and Tanjiro wondered if, like him, Musen too was posing as a human somewhere out there. It would explain why the Demon Slayer Corps was having such a hard time trying to find him. It left a bad taste in his mouth. Then, let's continue hunting the demons down. Now that it's getting dark, they're more likely to be out there, attacking civilians, Nezuko replied. Tanjiro nodded. They found the first and second demon hiding in the shadows of the alleyways as well, just like this third one. It wasn't really surprising. The demons didn't really have much of a choice, or they'd burn in the sun. It actually made tracking them easier for Tanjiro, as they were away from the crowds of people in the street proper. And there were very few human scents to set off his hunger. Once the sun sets and the night comes though, the demons could be anywhere. Tanjiro hoped they would have enough sense not to attack someone in the middle of the bustling city. The Demon Slayer Corps was not a government-recognized organization after all, and Tanjiro and Nezuko pulling out their katanas in the middle of a busy street to attack someone, demon or not, could easily get them in trouble with law enforcement. They already had a few close calls earlier today. Walking around with a sword strapped to your side was already against the law. They had to walk around the city while avoiding the police. They walked out of the labyrinth of alleys and back into the streets, Tanjiro paying attention to the scents around again, trying to locate their next target. Today was a long day filled with walking and demon slaying, but until they managed to free the city of dangerous man-eating demons, he would rather continue onwards than take a rest. He was glad that Kibutsuji Musen had already left. For that reason, one less thing to complicate matters. As they were walking along an empty street, filled with what seemed to be houses rather than shops, he He caught a whiff of it. Immediately, Tanjiro turned his head in the direction of the scent. It's a demon. No, it's not. Or maybe it was. The scent was really hard to place. It didn't have the sour scent he associated with demons, but it didn't seem quite human either. It smelled strange, slightly artificial. Tanjiro did not know how to explain it in words. Oni-chan, Nezuko asked, trying to catch his attention. Where was that scent coming from? What was that scent coming from? It was such a unique, distinctive scent, unlike anything Tanjiro had ever smelled before. Tanjiro tugged at Nezuko's heroism, wanting to follow the scent at the source. He had a gut feeling that this scent would direct them to somewhere important, even direct them to Tameo, perhaps. The traces were weak though, several hours old, just like Musen's. Tanjiro figured that meant that the person with this scent passed by here, on this very street, quite a long time ago. Perhaps, if they were a demon like Tanjiro suspected last night. Tanjiro closed his eyes and inhaled once more. The artificial scent was mingled with another one, someone that smelled like flowers and antiseptic. It, too, did not smell human, although it did not quite smell like a demon either. Tanjiro was confused. He faced Nezuko and signed, "Strange smell. Let's go." Nezuko nodded without question and followed Tanjiro around as he started sniffing around the road. Her Nichiren sword drawn just in case some random demon chose to attack them. Unlike Musen's scent, these new ones seemed to stray away from the crowded areas and more into secluded places. The sun set and the moon rose, the stars twinkling in the night sky. But even then Tanjiro still couldn't seem to find where the scents came from. He was starting to get frustrated. At one point, he had stopped in front of a dead end in a deserted street, a rare place in the city where there were no people walking by, and stared at the wall quizzically, half convinced his nose had stopped working. The scents ended here and no further. It was almost as if the sources blinked out of existence at this very spot. But that can't be it. People don't just disappear like that. Unless there was some kind of blood demon art involved. Could that be it? Tanjiro stood in front of the wall, hand on his chin, thinking hard. He was so distracted with trying to figure this mystery out that he had not realized the scent of the two remaining demons they had not killed yet were getting closer. At least not until the first Temari ball came barreling towards them. "Found you," a cheerful voice called out. "Oni-chan." Tanjiro gasped when he felt Nezuko push him out of the way as a Temari whoosed past them and buried itself on the wall he was standing in front of only a few seconds ago. Both demon and demon slayer fell to the ground. But Nezuko was quick to roll and stand up, hand clutching her katana as Tanjiro shrugged away his shock at the sudden attack. Tanjiro cursed his carelessness, to be caught off guard by another demon like this. He pulled out his own sword and stood up as well, focusing his attention on the demon that showed up on the street right in front of them. A pale-skinned woman with bright, slitted hazel eyes and an orange kimono, holding two more Temari balls on her hands. As soon as Tanjiro scented her, he felt his blood run cold. She was powerful, more powerful than any demon they had ever fought before. This close, her scent was thick and heavy inside Tanjiro's lungs. It did not compare to Kibutsuji Musen's, but it definitely trumps any other. This demon, she was dangerous. Unwilling to be caught off guard a second time, Tanjiro took another deep breath, realizing that there's another strong demon nearby. He glanced around the area, trying to find them. They were hiding somewhere. He looked up. "Above. Found you, the Temari demon was saying. "You in the demon slayer uniform. Was it you who killed all the newly turned demons that our lord had painstakingly made? It's you, isn't it? Wasting that person's efforts like this. You realize that you're going to have to pay for that, don't you?" Tanjiro and Nezuko tensed. Truth be told, Tanjiro expected the two remaining demons to be as weak as the first three they had fought today. But it was becoming apparent that that was not the case. As it happened, they made a target of themselves for slaying all those weak demons earlier, it seemed. Tanjiro supposed it did not matter. They were determined to slay all the man-eating demons in this city anyway. They were going to face these powerful ones one way or another. Tanjiro trusted that Nezuko and himself could take them. The demons they would face in their journey won't always be weak and helpless. And you, the Temari demon's eyes landed on him. A frown marred her face. "Huh? You're a strange one. You don't wear their uniform, but you have the sword they use as well. Huh? You, are you a demon?" Tanjiro made a silent thankful prayer to the gods that they did not track this demon in the morning, or Tanjiro's cover would have been blown. It seemed that Kaguya's words about stronger demons being able to tell other demons apart was true. He did not reply. The Temari demon grinned as she bounced her balls on the ground, her eyes filling with sadistic glee. "What fun this is," she said, her tone eerily playful. "I get to play with two people rather than one. Don't die yet, you two, not until I've had my fun." "It's coming," Nezuko warned. The Temeri demon launched her 2 balls on each of them, and Tanjiro immediately jumped out of the way. In his peripheral vision, he saw Nezuko dodge hers as well. The balls started bouncing around the street, creating chaos and rubble in its wake, damaging the walls and the ground of the street they were in. Tanjiro was grateful that there were no people around to get caught up in their fight. He jumped and sidestepped and dodged and ducked, evading the balls with ease. But his eyes kept searching for Nezuko, worry for his sister distracting him. The balls move with such force that a single hit could easily decapitate someone. Nezuko was human. Nezuko would not heal from such dire injuries. He couldn't let his little sister get hurt like that. Nezuko, don't worry about me, Nezuko yelled as she brandished her sword, determination in her eyes as a Temeri launched towards her. Water-breathing, 7th form, piercing raindrop. With precision, she thrusted the sword right in front of her with immense speed, piercing the ball right through the middle, reducing its impact. The ball tried to get away to no avail, dissolving into a fog of reddish mist. Tanjiro realized he was being stupid. He shushed the protective older brother in him, knowing that he had to in order to focus on the fight. Nezuko is strong, he told himself, a mantra he had come to thinking often to remind himself of how far she'd come. Nezuko will be alright. The other Temeri was coming at him, and Tanjiro decided this was not the time to dawdle. He was a swordsman, too, inspired by Nezuko's attack. He made a stance to deploy a similar thrusting form, bracing himself in his head. Hinekami Kagura, 7th form, Sunflower. The Temeri ball suddenly swerved and changed direction in midair, moving diagonally to the ground and bouncing back to attack Tanjiro. It happened so fast that Tanjiro was not able to react. The next thing he knew was the burst of white-hot pain as the ball hit him hard, taking a huge chunk of his shoulder with it. Tanjiro hissed as he clutched at his wound, blood seeping into his heroism as the Temeri demon laughed merrily, the ball bouncing back to her hand. Tanjiro's mind was racing. What the hell just happened? The way the ball swerved to avoid his attack was unnatural. How can the Temeri move like that? It's not spinning in any special way, so how? How fun, how fun. That's one down. The Temeri demon removed the upper part of her kimono with a flourish, and from her torso she grew 4 more arms. 5 more Temeri balls materialized on her palms, 1 for every hand, and she bounced them on the ground gleefully. Her bright eyes seemed to glow vindictively in the darkness of the night. To be killed by me, one of the 12 demon moons. You should be honored. Oni-chan. Tanjiro was hissing in pain, but he gave Nezuko a stern look, and the words behind them were unmistakable. Don't worry about me. Don't be distracted. Don't be like me. Nezuko still looked worried, but she nodded and faced the Temeri demon again. She had that look again, one of contained rage, and Tanjiro figured Nezuko must be furious at the demon for hurting him. The wound on his shoulder was gaping, and with Tanjiro being the way he is, a starved demon, that is, it was taking too long to heal. He was starting to feel dizzy, his hunger creeping up like an old mistress, Nezuko smelling entirely too good for a moment. Focus. He closed his eyes and took a deep, calming breath. He remembered Urikodaki's warning about how he would need more blood if he ever got injured, and thanked the gods he had the foresight to take a vial of blood with him. One that Nezuko had drawn out of her arm this morning in case of an emergency. He took it out of his pocket now, uncorking the vial and shifting his muzzle down for a moment to drink the blood within. The blood, although slightly old and no longer warm, was like heaven on his tongue. He stumbled a little bit, hit with a near overwhelming high. Drinking blood made him feel a little drunk most of the time. When he opened his eyes again, they were glowing red, the pupils slitted like a cat's. Veins were popping from his forehead to the hands that were holding his sword, the bleeding on his shoulder easing off, the flesh healing itself much quicker now that he had given his body a little bit of sustenance. Even in his dazed, mind-addled state he could feel power flowing into his limbs, and he figured that if he was going to make a critical attack, now was the time to do it. As the Temeri demon bounced her balls on the ground, Tanjiro prepared himself to strike. This is the end for you, the Temeri demon yelled as she tossed all 6 of her Temeri balls, and this time they moved unlike anything Tanjiro had ever seen before. The balls moved quick, darting to and fro, making turns in midair that should not be possible, but Tanjiro did not pay attention to them. His focus was on the demon herself, trusting that Nezuko could protect herself from the balls on her own. Tanjiro geared himself up and charged, hand tight against his Nichiren blade. Hinekami Kagura, 8th form. Tanjiro's blade seemed to wobble, becoming unfocused as if it was under the fiery heat of the summer sun. He dashed in front of the Temeri demon, slashing with his sword. In surprise, she jumped back and laughed merrily when he seemed to miss. She taunted, "What was that? Do you think you can bring me down with solar heat haze?" Blood exploded as the fleshy sound of meat being cut rang in the air. The Temeri demon cried out in pain as all 6 of her arms were cut cleanly off, but Tanjiro was not finished. He braced his feet on the ground and jumped, flipping in the air behind his opponent and slashing a vertical cut up on the demon's spine. 5th form, Fire Wheel. The Temeri demon wailed. And that's when Tanjiro scented it, the opening thread, connecting his sword to the demon's neck. Growing taut, one last attack and it was all his for the taking. He landed on his feet and twisted his body, moving his blade in an arc that will cut off the demon's neck. Hinakami Kagura. 1st form, Blood Demon Art, Koksu Arrow. The opening thread snapped. Suddenly, Tanjiro felt some unknown force tug at his body, and the next thing he knew he was being forcefully thrown away from the Temeri demon, hitting a wall so hard that it knocked the breath out of his lungs. He nearly let go of his sword, but he grabbed it stubbornly, as another force dragged him up into the air, tossing him around like a rag doll. It went on for a couple more turns until the force finally let him go, 30 feet in the air, gravity making itself known as he started speeding towards the ground. In panic, Tanjiro finished the move he was supposed to unleash on the Temeri demon, using it to break his fall. Dance. His sword slash created a crater on the ground, and Tanjiro rolled before jumping back on his feet, breathless. What was that? That seemed like the same power that made the Temeri balls move erratically, although this time Tanjiro was sure it was not coming from the Temeri demon herself. The Temeri demon was overwhelmed by his attack. There was no way she was able to counterattack with a demon blood art. That meant it must be some other demon's blood art. The demon that Tanjiro still smelled somewhere above, hiding his presence from the fight. They need to take him out first. The Temeri demon grew out her arms in no time, now looking positively furious. The arms Tanjiro had cut off started to crumble into ash. The demon materialized her balls again, throwing them all in Tanjiro's direction. You weird demon, you'll pay for that. The balls darted towards Tanjiro with renewed fervor, and he prepared himself to defend. Water breathing. 10th form, Constant Flux. Nezuko yelled, intercepting each of the Temeri balls with the force of a water dragon, gathering force with each rotation so that even with the erratic, forceful movements of the Temeri, she was able to catch them with her blade. Tanjiro's eyes lit up, proud of his younger sister. The 10th water-breathing form was the hardest one to master, one Nezuko struggled with during her training. And yet here she was now, overwhelming the Temeri demon's attacks with each swing of her blade. Yet this was no time to be impressed. Tanjiro let out a loud MMMPH, catching Nezuko's attention. 2nd demon. Up, Tanjiro signed. I'll go. Nezuko's eyes widened before nodding. Be careful, Oni-chan, she said as she sliced another Temeri with her sword. Tanjiro prepared himself and leaped, landing on top of one of the abandoned houses. He inhaled, taking in the scent of the other demon, trying to figure out where it was coming from. He jumped from roof to roof. The demon couldn't be that far. That was when he saw it, a figure not too far away, sitting down on the roof of one of the houses. He was a young man with an average build and short black hair, eyes curiously shut. Tanjiro did not waste any time. He knew that he would be in trouble if he let himself get caught once again in this demon's blood art. Tanjiro jumped, spiraling into the air to deliver a powerful slash. Hinakami Kagura. 10th form, Beneficent. Not so fast. You stay away from me. The demon noticed him, turning and lifting his hands, his palms facing Tanjiro. Each palm had an eye in the middle, the sclera glowing green with an arrow-like pupil. Tanjiro braced himself for the demon's attack. The eyes on his palms closed shut, and as soon as it did, Tanjiro felt that force again, catching his body and throwing him around like he weighed nothing, crashing him against walls and roofs and eventually hard onto the ground. Tanjiro let out a wheeze, feeling every broken bone in his body, every piece of bruised muscle. He could feel his body going into overdrive as it tried to fix him, craving for more of that human blood. Now that the demon was aware Tanjiro knew about him, it would be even harder to beat the guy. How could he, when he could not even get close to him? Tanjiro spit on the ground, his saliva tinged with red. He needed a plan. Think, hey, moron demon. Demon hunter. Tanjiro suddenly heard someone say behind him, and he turned his head to look and saw nothing. There was nobody there. There was a scent though, a familiar one, the strange, artificial scent he had been agonizing over a while ago. The one he had followed that led them to this place. Tanjiro blinked at the empty space, confused, but then the voice continued to talk. If you look at the arrows, you can avoid them. Arrows? Tanjiro was even more confused. Seriously, you can't even see them. And you had the gall to start a fight right in front of someone's house. The voice sounded aggravated. I'm going to lend you my sense of sight. So defeat that demon already. Seemingly out of nowhere, a piece of paper emerged, flying in the air and attaching itself to Tanjiro's forehead. As soon as it did, a red symbol appeared on it, drawn in red ink, and when Tanjiro blinked, suddenly he could see it, the red arrows that the disembodied voice was talking about, all headed towards him. Now with the ability to see the attacks before it hit him, Tanjiro was able to dodge the arrows with ease. He ran, ducked, sidestepped, leaped. It was easier, way easier, and he was thankful to that disembodied voice, whoever he is. Tanjiro jumped back up on the roofs to face the arrow demon, avoiding the demon's onslaught along the way. While the arrows made this demon a formidable opponent, if Tanjiro got close enough, cutting his neck off would be easy. So he strived to do so, closing in the distance with each arrow he dodged, not letting himself get caught in any. He didn't try to cut the arrows either, there was no point. He remembered the way the arrows caught and waddled him around. There was no doubt in him that should he try to cut these arrows, his sword would only get swerved in its direction. He just needed one good moment, one good swing. The closer he got to the demon, the more aggressive the arrows became. At one point the arrow demon launched an attack that circled around Tanjiro's entire sword arm. But Tanjiro, being a demon, was not very concerned. He just tossed his blade to his other hand as he let his sword arm be twisted into oblivion, gritting his fangs against his muzzle in pain as he soldiered on. The arrow demon got distracted, his glee on his successful attack creating an opening, one that Tanjiro was eager to take advantage of. He raised his sword with his uninjured arm as he took a deep breath, thinking in his head, Hinakami Kagura. 12th form, Tanjiro swung his sword downwards vertically, and the arrow demon jumped back to dodge. Tanjiro was prepared though. He was already preparing his next swing, the 12th form being a 2-combo strike, tilting his blade to continue with a horizontal slash. There it was again, the opening thread, and this time Tanjiro was not going to let this chance pass him by. He put all his force into this one last swing, aiming for the demon's neck. TCH, you persistent urchin. The demon lifted his hand and the ionic closed, signaling another attack. Tanjiro felt rather than saw the arrow beneath his foot, catching his sandals and threatening to send him off, away in the other direction. His sword was not going to make it. He needed to extend it. He needed more reach. Tanjiro's expression tightened in determination. He shrugged his sandal off, letting it get carried away by the arrow. Without even pausing the arc of his blade, he seamlessly transformed into a bigger version of himself, just like he did in Tomioka's fight, and it gave him the range he needed to reach the demon's neck, slicing it clean off with his blade. Flame dance. The scent of ash filled the air. The arrow demon's head fell beside Tanjiro's feet. Curse you, curse you, curse you. Even though you're a demon too, killing your kind like this, betraying our lord like this, I won't forgive you. The demon's crumbling body lifted both its arms, and Tanjiro was back on high alert. He swung his blade to slice the demon's hands off before he could make any post-mortem attacks, making sure to stab each of the eyes on his palms, just to be safe. The arrow demon let out even more wails and curses, but he could not do anything anymore, and soon enough he completely crumbled, leaving behind the scent of anger. Tanjiro could not help but feel sorry for him. To be so devoted to such a monster, even though it's the same monster that took away his humanity, to be manipulated like that. Tanjiro found himself pitying the arrow demon. He clutched at his twisted arm, wincing in pain, and transformed back to his normal age. The paper that was in his forehead glowed and then fell. Tanjiro did not have time to think about it, nor did he have time to search for the mysterious voice. He needed to get back to Nezuko quickly. When he arrived back where Nezuko was, he found out that there was nothing to be concerned about. Nezuko was standing in front of the crumbling Temari demon, a quiet sadness evident on her face. In her hand she held one of the demon's Temari balls, handing them to the demon's crumbling hand, and her hand clutched it possessively, even as it crumbled along with her. Tanjiro approached Nezuko silently, as she seemed to be deep in thought, sheathing her blade back into its scabbard. She was easier to fight after you faced the other demon. The Temari balls became easier to slice, Nezuko explained, though she did not look at him. She was already enraged because of your attacks, and I managed to rile her enough to get an opening and slash her neck. Tanjiro nodded. The scent of ash was all he could smell, the scent of death for a demon like him. He wondered why Nezuko looked so sad, so forlorn. He touched her shoulder, expression concerned. Nezuko gave him a shaky smile. She was like a little kid. Play with me, she said, as she was dying. Even though she must have killed a lot of people, this person, she was not evil at her core. She was just manipulated, deceived, by the same person who took away her humanity from her. It's sad. I pity her so much. It's tragic. Nezuko was having the same realizations he had with the arrow demon. Demons truly were sad, tragic creatures. It was not their fault they got turned, not Tanjirou's fault he got turned, but what they do after, it was all up to them. Starve himself and refrain from eating human flesh, that was Tanjirou's choice. He wished the other demons chose similarly. They shared a moment of silence for the demons they had slain. After that, Nezuko finally turned to give Tanjiro a once-over, her mouth gaping when she realized his sickeningly twisted, injured arm. Oni-chan, you're injured. Tanjiro stared at his arm, wondering how to fix it. Maybe if he untwisted it, it could heal on its own. Maybe it would need to be completely cut off and regrown. Tanjiro frowned. It hurt a lot, but they should really try to untwist it first before resorting to drastic measures. He dug his fangs into his muzzle and prepared to rotate. Stop. Don't aggravate it further, or you will cause yourself unnecessary pain, a woman's voice called out, surprising both Tanjiro and Nezuko. The smell of flowers and antiseptic filled the air, as well as that artificial scent. The two people Tanjiro had been tracking earlier, finally showing themselves. They seemed to step out of nowhere, out of a dead-end wall, really, and out came a beautiful woman with gentle eyes in a dark purple kimono, as well as a young boy with pale skin and interestingly colored hair. The young boy seemed to be in a state of perpetual annoyance, but the woman was smiling softly at them. She glanced at the spot where the Temeri demon once was, her expression turning solemn. You still use the term person to refer to a demon, she told Nezuko, before setting her eyes on Tanjiro. And you are a demon as well. Allow me, then, to lend you a hand. I am a demon, but I am also a doctor, and I could help treat your injury. You, Nezuko's eyes lit up in realization. Are you Tameo-san? The woman seemed surprised. You know of me. We came here to find you, Nezuko exclaimed excitedly, walking closer. We came with a message from the Demon Slayer Corps, as well as a request. If you could help us, please. Don't be too pushy, the young boy replied, lashing out at them. Tanjiro realized it was the same voice of the person that had helped him defeat the arrow demon. You are in the presence of the great Tameo-sama. She's already lending her time to treat your companion's wounds. Don't think you can ask whatever you want, eyesore. Tanjiro's brain stuttered. Eyesore? Did he mean ugly? Someone calling Nezuko ugly. The beauty of their hometown, Nezuko. Tanjiro was immediately, deeply offended. He let out loud MMPHS as he signed with his hands furiously. Even though the young boy did not understand it, he needed to let it out. Nezuko is beautiful. Nezuko is beautiful. Nezuko let out an embarrassed sound, evidently flustered with the passion in which Tanjiro was signing his words. It's alright, Oni-chan, she told him. Stop it, Yushiro, it is quite alright. I am interested in what they have to say, as well, Tameo assured the boy. Why don't we have this talk inside our home? I will be able to treat your brother in my clinic, where I have my supplies. Tameo-sama, I don't think it's wise to get involved, Yushiro interjected. Letting a demon slayer into our home. Tameo shook her head. I'm sure it will be all right. I believe our guests here are of pure intentions. She faced the dead-end wall, glancing at the two of them. Hurry, while there is nobody around. They phased through the wall, and once again, their scent disappeared all of a sudden, even though Tanjiro knew they were close. It must be some kind of blood demon art, for Tanjiro's nose to be affected like this. Perhaps it was the reason why they were so hard to track, even for Kibutsuji Musen. Tanjiro and Nezuko shared a look before they both walked through the wall as well, and it was surprisingly no longer solid unlike before, allowing them entrance, revealing a house behind the dead end, a huge, two-story building in the middle of a large courtyard, plain and unremarkable save for the paper that was pasted above its entrance, similar to the paper that helped Tanjiro see the arrow demon's attacks. Wow, Nezuko murmured. Tameo smiled. Welcome, she said, to our humble residence. Please pardon the mess. Make yourselves at home. Tanjiro did not know what Tameo meant by mess, as everything inside the house looked quite pristine. As soon as they entered the house, Tameo led them to a room that Tanjiro supposed must be the clinic. Diagrams of the human body were posted on the walls, medical textbooks and bottles of what Tanjiro thought must be medicine littered the shelves, and a single bed was in the corner, the sheets made of clean, white linen. Tanjiro sniffed around a little bit, noting the faint scent of blood and humans in the air. He supposed Tameo truly was a doctor, as the scent of her past patients were still evident under all the antiseptic. She must treat injured humans, too, and that only made his respect for her rise. He personally would not be able to stand it, being around a heavily bleeding human for so long. There was a reason Nezuko uses a needle and syringe to give him her blood, so as not to tempt Tanjiro's demonic instincts more than necessary. Tameo donned a doctor's apron and started rummaging around the shelves, pulling items out. She gestured on the bed, glancing at Tanjiro as she stated, "Please take a seat." This will only take a minute. I would like to inspect your injury first, if you would allow me. Tanjiro cradled his broken arm as he nodded, walking over to sit on the bed. He tried not to show any sign of pain. He didn't want to worry Nezuko, even though the injury does hurt something awful. In the middle of the fight, with all the breathing forms and rapid adrenaline, Tanjiro had not allowed himself to focus on the agony of his arm. But now that the dust has settled, now that his body was calming down, he found himself actually regretting letting the arrow demon twist it quite a lot, wincing when Tamayo walked closer and examined it. She let out a soft hum before she took out a syringe, drawing some kind of medicine from a small bottle. "It's healing so slow," she murmured, almost to herself. She pushed the plunger of the syringe, letting the air out carefully. "This medicine will heal your arm right away. It is made exclusively for demons. It also has an anesthetizing effect, so that we may untangle your arm without any issue. Please hang on for a moment." She held Tanjirou's hand and plunged the needle into a vein in his wrist, and almost immediately, Tanjiro could feel its effects. He felt his arm numb out, the pain receding. All the broken bones he had from being thrown around by the arrow demon seemed to heal instantly. After a minute, Tamayo carefully rotated his arm, and to his wonder, it started healing just as quick as she promised, the broken bones mending until his arm was good as new. By the time Tanjiro was able to move his arm around, the numbing effect had already gone away too, making it seem as if he was never injured. He stared at Tamayo in awe and signed, "Thank you." "Ah," he says, "thank you, Tamayo-san," Nezuko interpreted for him. Tanjiro nodded with a soft smile. Tamayo returned the gesture with a smile of her own, and for some reason, Tanjiro was reminded of his mother, the soft-spoken, ever-caring Kai, and he found himself warming up to this person, even though she was a demon. Well, she was not like any other demon they had faced before, that's for sure. Yushiro as well. The only demons Tanjiro had seen thus far were vicious man-eating monsters. It was a relief to be face to face with demons that were just like Tanjiro, people who had not lost themselves to Kibutsuji Musen's influence. As he pondered this, Tamayo sat on a chair that was placed by the bedside. She regarded Nezuko with gentle eyes. "I believe we have not properly introduced ourselves, have we? My name is Tamayo, although you seem to already know that." She nodded at Yushiro's direction, who was now standing stiff beside Nezuko, obviously wary of the two. "That boy is Yushiro, my assistant and traveling companion. I hope that you'll be his friend." "Yes," Nezuko replied brightly, which only seemed to irritate Yushiro more. He started to grit his teeth a little, hands clenched. Nezuko's smile became uneasy as she amended, "If Yushiro-san approves of it." At least that seemed to ease the rising temper of the young-looking demon. Nezuko continued, "My name is Kamado Nezuko, and this is my older brother, Kamado Tanjirou. I'm a demon slayer and my brother is." She gave them a sheepish smile. "Well, it's a bit complicated." "I can see that it is," Tamayo replied, thoughtful. "Your brother wields a demon slayer's blade, and yet he is a demon himself. I could tell that there is a story behind this. You also mentioned a message from the Demon Slayer Corps. I have to admit I have done my best to steer clear of that crowd, lest they come after my own head. I have avoided your organization for centuries for this very reason." Nezuko's eyes widened. "Centuries? Tamayo-san, exactly how old are?" Nezuko let out a choking sound when Yushiro smacked her on the chest repeatedly, practically screaming. "Don't ask a lady her age, you ill-mannered scoundrel." Tanjiro let out a growling screech as he immediately put himself in between Yushiro and Nezuko, glaring at the demon boy with all the intensity of a protective older brother. How dare he hurt a girl like this? Nezuko of all people. If someone here was an ill-mannered scoundrel, it was him. Nezuko let out a few coughs as she signed that she's all right. Tanjiro decided that he would stand between Nezuko and this Yushiro brat from now on, to prevent any more Nezuko bullying. Tamayo let out an exasperated sigh as she scolded her charge. "Stop it. Why would you resort to violence?" Yushiro looked down, although he did not look quite so ashamed with his actions, merely letting Tamayo scold him without complaint. Tamayo stood up and took off her apron, walking to a set of sliding doors in the back of the room as she continued, "I believe it would be better for us to continue our talk in the parlor. Come this way." They sat in the parlor, kneeling on a zabuton pillows on the tatami floor. Despite the western-looking exterior of the house, it seemed that the interior remained Japanese and traditional. Tamayo sat on one side while Tanjiro and Nezuko sat facing her. Tamayo murmured something to Yushiro, and the boy left without another word. Personally, Tanjirou did not care if Yushiro came back or not, still angered by his assault on his sister. That was probably a mean thing to think though, so he kept it to himself. I've been meaning to ask for a while now, but Tameo started, her eyebrows furrowing a little as she regarded Tanjirou. Are you unable to speak, or simply unwilling to, because of that muzzle? Tanjirou and Nezuko exchanged a glance. Nezuko's expression seemed to be asking him if he was comfortable with her answering her question, and to that Tanjirou nodded. Nezuko met Tameo's eyes once again, smiling uneasily. Onii-chan can speak. Sort of. He could only talk in short sentences, though, and his voice doesn't sound so good. He told me he could think just fine, but he's been having problems putting his thoughts to words ever since he's been turned into a demon more than 2 years ago. He knew what he wanted to say, but he couldn't quite say it. I don't know how to explain it, since Onii-chan is the one experiencing it. Nezuko glanced at Tanjiro again. Tanjiro sighed, words come out slow. Like, he paused, realizing they had not made a gesture yet for molasses, as it was an uncommon word. He let out a small frown, dejected as he signed instead, never mind. Tameo tilted her head, the doctor in her contemplative. Something like speech apraxia, I presume. It's a neurological disorder, something wrong in the brain, where the brain knows what it wants to say, but cannot properly plan and sequence the required speech sound movements. It could be slightly different, since you're a demon and not a human, but it must be something similar. Tanjirou's frown deepened. So there was something wrong with his brain. Why would that be? He had a perfectly functional brain back when he was human. At least he thought so. Why would Onii-chan have something like a neurological disorder? Nezuko asked worriedly. It is only my guess, but... Tameo paused, seemingly choosing her word carefully. For your wounds to heal so slowly, for the Demon Slayer Corps to approve of your existence. Tanjiro-san, you have not been eating human flesh, have you? I saw you drink some blood back there while you were fighting, but I assume you have not given your body any other sustenance. Tanjiro nodded. Human flesh has nutritional qualities that human blood does not. It is only expected, as human flesh is more solid and has more substance to it. The demon transformation requires a lot of energy, and there are parts of the human body that Kibutsuji Musen's cells consume in the transformation, particularly in the brain. To regrow these parts, the freshly turned demon needed nutrients from human flesh. There is a reason why demons have no sense of self until they have eaten their first few humans. The fact that Tanjiro-san could think for himself like a normal person without eating a single human was a miracle in and of itself. Tanjiro did not like the explanation that he was technically brain damaged, but he simply let out a small sigh. It seemed his gut feeling that his speech was a price he paid for not eating humans was more correct than he had thought. But Tameo-san and Yushiro-san do not eat humans, either do you. But you could speak just fine, Nezuko reasoned. Is there no way to heal him? At her words, Tameo winced. A pained expression fell on her face, full of remorse and guilt. Before I left Kibutsuji Musen's service, I ate humans too, once upon a time. I believe all the people I have eaten then were enough for my body to heal the damage the transformation had caused. She stared at her hands that were placed on her lap, as if she could not quite bear to meet their gazes. Since then, I have tweaked my body considerably, so that I would never need or crave human flesh again. A small amount of blood is all I need. Yushiro, on the other hand, is a special case. I created him myself, so there was no damage in the transformation to men to begin with. He gets by with even less blood than me. What I do these days, and you might find this distasteful, is to buy blood under the guise of blood transfusions from those unable to make ends meet. So that's why Tanjiro was not picking up the strange scent unique to demons from the two of them, and why Yushiro smelled strangely artificial. Tanjiro was shocked that Tameo had eaten humans before, and that she was in Kibutsuji's service once upon a time. He had kind of assumed she was just like him, someone who denied their demonic instincts from the start. Still, she was leading what seemed to be an honest life now, no longer hurting humans. Tanjiro could respect that. Could you? Nezuko hesitated. I don't mean to ask for too much, but could you tweak Onii-chan's body that way, as well? It would not heal the damage to his brain, I'm afraid. It won't cure his muteness, and tweaking the body this way could take several months. I am willing to try though, if he is willing to stay with us for a while. Tanjiro immediately shook his head. He would not be leaving Nezuko for any length of time, especially not now that she was a demon slayer. He was determined to stay with her every step of the way, to aid her in missions, to protect her. He would not give that up for anything, even the chance to finally not crave flesh any longer. It's not like he needed these tweaks anyway. He was managing his own hunger just fine so far, even though it felt impossible to resist sometimes. I see. It is ultimately your decision, of course, Tameo replied. Nezuko still looked like she wanted to argue with him about it, but Tanjiro gave her a look and signed, "Enough about me. More important things. Demon Slayer Core." "Tameo-san," Nezuko started, looking a little nervous. "I did mention earlier that my brother and I, were trying to find you to ask for your help, and to relay a message from the Demon Slayer Core. Oyakata-sama, she stuttered, rummaging through her pockets as she seemed to be trying to find something. Tanjiro wondered what it is until she took a folded piece of paper, and he remembered. Kagaya had given them this letter to give to Tameo before he left that day, telling them to deliver it to her. Nezuko offered the letter to Tameo. She took the paper gingerly, opening it up carefully as she took a few minutes reading. At first her expression betrayed nothing, but at one point where her eyes widened, glancing at Tanjiro before continuing on. Tanjiro figured that must have been the point when she learned about his unusual sun resistance. He didn't know what else could elicit such a reaction. After a long moment, Tameo folded up the letter neatly, her expression contemplative. She slid the letter inside her kimono as she seemed to digest the information she had gotten, staring at the siblings in a new light. Tanjiro thought he saw a hint of yearning in her eyes, one that betrayed an innermost desire, as she folded her hands on her lap silently. It is true, Kibutsuji Musen would give anything to be able to walk into the sun. Should he find out about you, Tanjiro-san, he would do anything to get his hands on you. You are in a perilous situation. She paused, before continuing. I am willing to aid the Demon Slayer Corps, as well as the two of you, if it meant we could annihilate Kibutsuji Musen once and for all. Tanjiro's eyes widened. Nezuko exclaimed as she bowed, "Thank you, Tameo-san." Tameo nodded, fondness in her eyes, though her expression remained serious. "However, I have one condition. We will only proceed with baiting Kibutsuji with Tanjiro-san only when the medicine for turning demons back into a human is complete. Only then. As soon as he's been drawn out in the open, Tanjiro-san must immediately be turned back into a human. For if that man gets a hold of Tanjiro-san and devours him while he's still a demon, it will be the doom of us all." Nezuko let out a gasp, hope immediately blossoming in her eyes. "There's medicine for that. Please tell us more." Tameo's expression softened. "So turning him back is your wish. I had figured that is the case. I am a doctor, and I sincerely believe that for every ailment, there is always a medicine or some kind of treatment. At this time, I am unable to turn a demon back into a human, but eventually that too." She trailed off. "A medicine must be completed to decrease the risk of strengthening Kibutsuji even more. I will dedicate my time to establishing a method of treatment. Towards that end, I'd like to ask you to do a few things for me." Nezuko leaned in, obviously interested. Tanjiro's heart was fluttering too. To be turned back into a human, that would be a dream come true. Tanjiro would like that very much. He waited with bated breath for Tameo to continue, anticipation rolling in his gut. To produce such an elixir, it is necessary to study the blood of numerous demons. I have two favors to ask of you. 1. Permission to study Tanjiro-san's blood. His current condition is extremely rare and unique. He had never eaten human flesh, and yet he is lucid and retained his human mind and emotions. His ability to walk in the sun is another thing. A demon who can walk under the sunlight is one step closer to being human, after all. These miracles will be key to finding a solution. Tanjiro was nodding eagerly. He was willing to give any amount of blood anytime, if it could further Tameo's research, if it could help in any way. 2. To retrieve blood samples as closely related to Kibutsuji as possible. This request is a harsh one, Tameo continued. By demons related to Kibutsuji, I meant demons whose powers are more on par with that of Kibutsuji himself, like one of the 12 demon moons. It won't be easy to extract blood from such demons. 12 demon moons. Nezuko's eyes widened with recognition. The Temari demon. She says she's one of them. I should have taken her blood. No, she is not one of the demon moons, Tameo consoled her. She is too weak, and there are numbers written on the demon moons' eyeballs. Once you see it, you will know. Too weak, Tanjiro thought. At that level, he remembered how thick their scents felt on his nose, remembered how strong they smelled. But then again, Nezuko was able to dispatch the Temari demon by herself, so he supposed she wasn't all that powerful. Tanjiro was also able to almost cut her neck too, if the arrow demon had not interfered. So to create this medicine, Tanjiro and Nezuko had to find even stronger demons and defeat them. He did not like that Nezuko would have to be in so much danger. He wished he could do this all by himself. She won't like that, though. She has her pride as a demon slayer and a swordswoman, too. I see. I'll have to fight demons stronger than her, then. If there is no other way, then I'll do it, Nezuko said, her expression determined. Tanjiro took her hand and squeezed. With his free hand, he signed, "We'll do it." Together, Nezuko's expression softened. She squeezed back. If Tameo-san manages to create a medicine, it won't be just Oni-chan. Lots of people will be saved, too, right? Nezuko continued, smiling widely at Tameo. Maybe we could ask Oyakata-sama for the help of other demon slayers too. This is all for everyone's benefit after all. I will write him a letter and see what he thinks about it. Thank you very much, Tameo-san. Tameo smiled. It is my pleasure. There is one last thing. How to hide Tanjiro-san's demonic nature. I believe we may also have a solution for that, although I would have to ask for Yushiro's help. You see, it is that boy's demon blood art that allows us to remain hidden from Kibutsuji's eyes. Please let us discuss the matter between ourselves for tonight. Allow me to convince him to lend his aid. In the meantime, as if on cue, Yushiro entered the room. He nodded at Tameo, gave the two guests a displeased look, before announcing, "The guest rooms are ready, Tameo-sama." "Thank you," Tameo replied. She regarded Tanjirou and Nezuko again before continuing. "In the meantime, why don't the two of you rest for a while? We may not have much in terms of meals, but there are soft, warm beds we could provide. After the fights the two of you had gone through, you must be quite exhausted." Tanjirou and Nezuko shared a look. Tanjirou sighed, and Nezuko nodded before telling Tameo, "Oni-chan and I are sharing a single room, if that's all right. And don't worry, I'm not really all that hungry. Are there some paper and writing utensils I could borrow? I would like to tell Oyakata-sama how our talk went as soon as possible." "Of course, I'll provide it," Tameo promised. "Please enjoy your stay." Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. And comment down your opinion on this video. Thanks for stopping by and I'll see you in the next one.